Vocabulary is definitely important in the PTE academic reading and writing fill in the blanks questions. But today we're going to give you lots of helpful tips on how to answer these questions successfully. Hi, I'm Sharon, and I'm a PTE trainer here at Benchmark Education Solutions. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, we're going to take a closer look at the reading and writing fill-in-the-blank questions. We'll start with an overview of this question type and what you can expect. Then we'll talk about how these questions are scored. At the end, we'll do 5 examples together, and I'll leave you with some important tips to keep in mind. Let's get started with a brief overview of this question. So what is reading and writing fill-in-the-blanks all about? This is the very first task in the reading section, in which you'll see a text of up to 300 words. In this text, there will be multiple gap fills, also called fill-in-the-blanks. A drop-down list with 4 options of words to choose from is shown for each gap. The types of words you'll see as options may vary. You could have 4 options that are all similar because they're synonyms, or you might see a different grammatical form of the word. This may be testing your comprehension, whether or not you know the meaning of certain words. It could be testing your grammar, in that you'll need to know what type of word goes in the gap. It could be testing your knowledge of collocations, or words that go together naturally in English. And last, it's also testing your understanding of the context of the entire reading. And you can expect to see 5 to 6 of these questions on test day. Now let's look at how these questions are scored. First, the scoring of these questions is considered integrated. That means it contributes to both your reading and writing scores. If you think about it, it makes sense. The gap fills that rely on context and meaning check your reading comprehension, and the gap fills that involve examining word choice and collocations test your writing skills. For example, when you're writing, you'll be choosing from many different words, and you need to understand which words are usually used together. You get partial credit for each correctly completed blank. You get a score of 1 for each correctly completed blank, and you don't get any points if you get a completed blank wrong. So one paragraph would have 5 or 6 potential points, which is why this question type is considered very important in terms of scoring. Now let's look at our first example. Here's an example text with 5 gaps in red. Each of the 5 gaps will have 4 options listed as A through D. We'll go through strategy and tips more in our in-depth lesson, but for now, here are a few things to keep in mind. First, don't read the whole text word for word at a leisurely pace. Remember, you only have about 2 minutes for each text, and you have a lot to do. You will probably end up reading most of the text because you'll want to look at words and sentences before and after your gaps to help you find the right answer. First of all, let's skim through the text and look for keywords. From skimming this text, I see words like scientists, green, lab experiments, and that's already enough to tell me about the topic. I know that this is going to be a scientific piece of text, which is probably going to make it a little more difficult. After skimming the text for around 5 seconds, I'll want to look for the first empty gap. In our case, that's the first sentence. However, before I read the sentence, I want to take a look at the answer options: emanate, generate, form, and represent. Reading these answers first prepares my mind for the sentence I'm about to read. I see that these answer options are all verbs, which gives me a clue to the missing word. If you'd like to try this for yourself, feel free to pause the video and then come back and see my answer. Now I'm going to read the sentence, paying very close attention to the words before and after the gap. Scientists have created bacteria covered in tiny semiconductors that blank a potential fuel source from sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. Alright, so I need to decide which verb fits best. The most important parts of this sentence are the subject, tiny semiconductors, and the object, a potential fuel source. Since this is a scientific text, I'll have to think about what semiconductors would do to a potential fuel source. Then I'll use the process of elimination. The first word that looks completely wrong to me is represent, because semiconductors would not represent a potential fuel source. Those are two different things, so I would eliminate that. Secondly, emanate means to spread out from something else, and that wouldn't make sense in this context, so I would eliminate that as well. Now we're left with generate and form. Form would mean that semiconductors somehow focus on the shape of a potential fuel source, and that wouldn't make sense because fuel sources don't have a shape. So we're left with generate, which does make sense given the meaning and context of the sentence. Semiconductors generate or produce potential fuel sources. This makes the most sense, and I would choose it for my answer. Notice how those four options were pretty similar, especially B and C. This is why vocabulary is pretty important, as well as taking time to prepare. So now moving on to question 2, I'm going to look at my answers first and then read my specific sentence. If I need to read the sentences before and after to help me in terms of context, I can do that, but it may not always be necessary. The options are rather, absolutely, much, and considerably. Here's a good tip. Since these are all adverbs, I can be pretty sure this is a grammar-based question. That means I won't have to read the sentences that come before and after because the question relies more on grammar than it does on meaning. In lab experiments, the bacteria proved blank more efficient at harvesting sunlight than plants. So I need something that would make sense before more. When looking at my options, I notice one thing right away. Much is an adverb, but it's also a quantifier. We could say that the bacteria were much more efficient at something, more than something else. The fact that more is included in the sentence gives us the biggest clue here. Including options A, B, and D before more would not make sense. Even if you weren't aware of the grammar, you may know that much more is a common collocation we use when we're talking about quantities. So answer C, much, is the right answer. Now let's move on to question number 3. And again, I'm going to read the answer options first, and then I'll go back and read the sentence. My options are color, pigment, dye, and tint. These are all synonyms, so this is probably going to be another question that relies on vocabulary and context. In nature, the green blank chlorophyll is the key to this process. This is actually the only part of the sentence I need. The question is asking what chlorophyll would best be described as. Again, this is pretty scientific and not an easy question to answer. But from your past knowledge and preparation, you might know that chlorophyll is indeed a pigment, and that's how it's defined. But if you didn't know this, we can still use the process of elimination to find the right answer. A dye is not a natural substance, and chlorophyll is natural. Besides, a dye is not a color. So you could eliminate option C, and you would never see a color named chlorophyll, which means you could eliminate option A. Then you're left with B and D. A tint is a shade of a color, and since we know that chlorophyll isn't a color, you could eliminate D as well. That leaves us with answer B, pigment, which is a synonym for color. You can see that your knowledge of vocabulary is important in questions like this, when you have to choose between two words that are similar. Let's move on to question 4. We're almost finished. My answer options are in spite, despite, even, and regardless. This is another grammar question since these are all different types of conjunctions. Let's look at the sentence. But blank, the fact that it works, scientists say the process is relatively inefficient. This sentence combines two contrasting ideas. Typically, all of our answer options do combine two contrasting ideas, but based on your knowledge of grammar and how these phrases are used, we can use the process of elimination to come up with the right answer. Option A, we usually say in spite of, not just in spite. Since of is not included, in spite, the fact that it works, doesn't make sense. We can eliminate that. Option B, but despite the fact that it works, this would definitely make sense. This is our answer, but let's look at the other answers to double check. Option C, but even the fact that it works, this doesn't make grammatical sense. We would need to say something like, but even if it works, for it to make sense. So we can eliminate this. Option D, but regardless the fact that it works, also doesn't make grammatical sense. Here too, the word regardless is usually followed by of, but regardless the fact that it works doesn't sound right. Since of is not included, this answer can be eliminated. All right, our last question. Let's look at the answer options. We have examining, brushing, inspecting, and combing. We see that these are all verbs in the gerund form with ing. Let's read our sentence. After blank, through old microbiology literature, researchers realized that some bugs have a natural defense to... Okay, now we need to find out which of these verbs makes the most sense when it comes to old literature. Examining through would not make sense since examining does not require the word through. You would just say examining old literature. So we can eliminate option A. Brushing through old literature doesn't make sense. Brushing is not a verb you would use with literature, so you can eliminate option B. Inspecting through old microbiology literature isn't necessarily wrong, but it doesn't really make sense either. And we wouldn't typically use through with the verb inspecting. So let's look at option D. Combing through old microbiology literature. Now, combing through is a known collocation. It means to search carefully and systematically. Given the context of old literature, this is the correct option. This last one was a bit tricky because brushing is similar to combing when it comes to hair. And if someone wasn't familiar with collocations, it would be easy to confuse the two. This is a classic example of a question that relies on both context and collocations. So there you have it. How did you do? Of course, I took my time to explain each answer option to you, but the goal would be for you to do this on your own in less than 2 minutes. Remember, in our in-depth video, we go into more strategies and detailed examples. And before you go, I want to leave you with some important tips for this question type. First, reading and writing fill in the blank is considered to be one of the most important question types in this exam because each complete text carries roughly 4 to 5 points. And with 5 to 6 of these questions on test day, that adds up to a lot of points. So make sure you prepare for this and use your time wisely. Time management is very important, so try to stay around 2 minutes per question. Remember that you'll need to pace yourself for the reading portion. Like we did today, remember to analyze your options in terms of the sentence by paying attention to the words before and after the gaps. Use the process of elimination when necessary, and don't forget to hit next as soon as you're finished to move on to the next question. I hope this video gave you a general overview of what to expect for the reading and writing fill-in-the-blank question type. If you'd like to see more practice questions or learn more about the exam, check out our website and watch our other videos like the in-depth lesson or the helpful do's and don'ts for this question type. You'll find links to those videos in the description below. And check out our website at edubenchmark.com for lots of helpful PTE information and coaching. You should also take our PTE speaking mock test, where you'll speak in real time with an experienced PTE trainer and get recommendations that are individualized just for you. Please leave me a comment below and let me know how you did on the sample questions. If this is your first time with us, don't forget to subscribe and click the little bell so you don't miss a single video. Thanks for joining me, and I will see you in the next